Developing coordination is one of the fundamental aspects of playing the drums effectively and musically. In this series of videos, I'm going to be exploring the process of developing coordination and incorporating new vocabulary into our playing through a funk, rock and fusion context. To do this, I'm going to be working through my new book, Drum Kit Coordination Patterns, Funk and Rock, demonstrating the concepts, demonstrating the material, and discussing the ideas at play to help us get the most out of the material available to us. One of the core aspects of this book is that it lays out every single permutation and pattern that is there and visibly available to see. Many of the other coordination books available to us, as good and as comprehensive as they are, often use abbreviation. They show us the hi-hat symbol, they show us the bass drum placement, they show us the snare drum placement, and so on, and then they ask us to visualize the finished pattern as we put it all together. With this series of books, all of those patterns are laid out for us, and this has some very interesting and handy applications. First of all, we don't need to guess, we don't need to visualize, we can see it right there and then, and I have seen firsthand my students, even some beginner students, play some quite advanced patterns very, very quickly because they can see exactly where every piece lines up. Secondly, in having it available to us as a reference guide, it allows us to combine, it allows us to modify and change and rearrange almost infinitely to create and discover some really, really interesting combination patterns. So that is the process I'm going to discuss today. In the first part, I'm going to be looking primarily at bass drum patterns within a basic groove permutation, and secondly, latterly, I'm going to be looking at snare drum positions, but that will be for a second video. The whole idea behind this material is to solidify our understanding and our familiarity with the possible places in which we can play either a bass drum, a snare drum, or both of those things in conjunction with each other. And this is going to take place against an unchanging hi-hat pattern. Now, as we shall see, the actual material in the book is relatively simple, but because everything is outlined for us, there is no abstraction, there is no visualization. Everything is written out note for note for pages and pages. This allows us a lot of freedom in terms of our application. So to see this, we start at the very beginning. Our basic pattern is going to be building upon an eighth note groove. Simply this. We can hear there, our basic rock groove, we have a steady downbeat on beat 2 of the bar. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and. This natural point of emphasis is what makes the groove sound like a groove, and we need to maintain that regardless of whatever else we may do, at least in the first case. Now, set 1.1, the bass drum set, as it appears on page 25, deals with 16th note permutations, possible places in which we can place that bass drum on a 16th note grid. Well, what does that mean? Well, if we take our hi-hat pattern, we are figuring those as eighth notes. So they are counted 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now we know that there are 2 16th notes for every eighth note. So we can play that steady hi-hat pattern, but count it as 16th notes. 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1 E and 2 E and. This means our hi-hat is playing constant eighth notes, but we are feeling the 16th note subdivision beneath that. Now, a bass drum can be played in any of those 16th note subdivision slots. They're kind of like available slots into which we can place a bass drum. And for our current purposes, developing a sort of funk fusion groove, we need to be comfortable and confident placing that bass drum in any of those slots. So to begin with, in the first iteration of this set, the snare drum stays constant on beat 2 of the bar, and we are dealing with the possible bass drum placements for the first beat of the bar. That means we have only 4 possible slots for the bass drum, the 1, the E, the and, or the all the while against an unchanging hi-hat pattern. So when we look at the third example, exercise C, that bass drum has moved from the beat, which I just demonstrated a moment ago, onto the E position. 1 E and 2 E and that snare drum occurs as normal on the downbeat of the bar. It sounds like this. We have that bass drum occurring 1 E and 2 and 1 E and 2 and. Now this is most obvious and most easy to hear when we play that in combination with the basic pattern. The basic pattern I am calling the one with the bass drum on the beat and the snare drum on the beat. So I'm going to alternate between the basic pattern, which is shown here as exercise B, and then the new pattern, which has got that bass drum displaced by 1/16th note. I'll play one iteration of each, and you will hear that bass drum move. We can create a steady combination there where that bass drum begins on the beat in the first half of the bar and displaces to the second 16th note, the E, on the second part of the bar. We can progress now. Exercise D moves that bass drum another 16th note onto the AND position. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and finally exercise E, the fourth 16th note position, 1 E and 2 E and So to begin with, our first stage is to run through these four positions, the 1, the E, the and the and become comfortable with each one individually and in transitioning between them. So to begin with, I'm going to play each exercise, let's do it 4 times each, and you will hear how that bass drum moves, displaces by 1/16th note each time. You can hear there the hands were completely unchanged, the snare drum stayed constant on beat 2 of the bar, and that bass drum displaced by 1/16th note each time. Progressing on from there, we move to the 2-note combinations where the patterns comprise 2 bass drum placements. If we run from patterns F to K, we find examples of this every 2-note permutation where that bass drum can be played twice in the first beat. I won't labour the point, I'll play each exercise twice, F, G, H, I, J and K, and we will hear every permutation of 2 bass drum strokes against that unchanging ostinato. Running on, just so you can hear them, L, M, N and O are the 3-note combinations. These comprise exercises with 3 bass drum placements. They sound like this. And then finally, the final exercise of the set, P, is all 4 16th notes played on that first beat. Now, laid out in this way, we can very clearly see all of those permutations. We can clearly see how each bass drum note aligns against the unchanging hi-hat pattern. So that's very handy. It's very useful to us to be able to see that. But the real application in this first set, the bass drum movement, starts to come when we combine. Now, we can essentially do this at random. We can pick any 2. So if I just choose 2 F and N, I just pick them entirely at random, F and N, creating a 4-beat combination would sound like this. Now, we could do that any number of times. I could combine any 2 combinations, I could combine any 4 or 6 or 8, any number of combinations really to create longer and longer patterns. And that is one good way that we can develop vocabulary here. But more importantly, in the instance, in reference to incorporating vocabulary, we want to delve a little deeper. So this can really become internalized for us. So I'm going to stay with that pattern. It was quite nice. F and N. It sounds like this again. And as I repeat this, I'm going to try a lot of different things with it. I'm going to start trying some open hi-hat placements in there. I'm going to start moving to the ride cymbal. I'm going to start incorporating some ride bell work, and I'm going to see where it takes me. The whole purpose here, as well as addressing the physical coordination of that bass drum placement, is to explore possible applications so that this isn't just an idea from a book, but this becomes something that we actually know how to play on a musical scale. So let's see what happens. F and N with some application this time. it's starting to sound quite nice, and I'm just starting to get a feel for how this combination works, some different ride bell ideas, some different open hi-hat ideas. Now, crucially, while we're over here on the ride cymbal, playing that steady eighth note pattern, playing the particular combination comprising F and N, those two bass drum placements, this left foot hi-hat is not doing anything. So our next stage here is to develop four-way coordination where we are maintaining a steady pulse on the hi-hat. To begin with, we always start on the beat. So that hi-hat is just going to play 1, 2, 3, 4. Once we're comfortable with that, we can start to become a little bit more adventurous. Maybe I can try straight eighths on the hi-hat, matching that ride cymbal pattern. Or maybe I can try offbeat eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... One of my personal favourites is to play constant eighth notes but splash the hi-hat. And we can be as adventurous as we like. We can try claves, we can try different rhythmic patterns on that hi-hat, but the entire purpose here is twofold. First of all, from a technical execution point of view, we are shoring up our ability to play that particular bass drum permutation. And especially when we start combining later patterns, we are increasing our range that we have available to us to play that bass drum against that groove. Secondly, and this is the step that is often neglected, we are learning the musical applications to this pattern through exploration. And I can't stress this enough, how important it is to just spend time playing the coordination pattern you are practicing and exploring. What happens if? What happens if I play it over here? What happens if I incorporate that ride bell? What happens if I incorporate some open hi-hat strokes, or I play some particular foot pattern on that left foot hi-hat? And you'll find very quickly this comes from being something of a rather bland coordination exercise to actually a deep piece of musical vocabulary that you have ready to play and perform and improvise with at a later date. And this is the whole purpose of this book, really. Yes, it presents everything written out, but it's not just a dictionary, it is a body of ideas. And it is your job as the student, it is our job as the musician to take that and turn it into something musical. We can try another example here. Let's stick with N, but let's go N and O. So this is two of the three-note combinations. It would sound like this, just in its basic form. And there we have another really nice groove that is written out and ready for us to start exploring. Now from here, we want to move on to taking that bass drum after the snare drum as well. So far, we have limited ourselves to playing that bass drum within the first beat of the bar. And to do this, I've just advanced forward in the book a few pages. We're now on set 1.1, the Fatback set, and this begins on page 29. And the idea here is that the bass drum moves through those same 4 16th note permutations from the first beat, but also moves through the 16th note permutations on the second beat as well. Now, because the second beat is reserved for that snare drum downbeat, the three possible positions in which we can play a bass drum on beat 2 are the E, the and the For now, because of the nature of the groove, because of the nature of the style of music, we are going to avoid playing a bass drum at the same time as the snare drum downbeat. So when we look at exercise B on page 29, we have our bass drum before the snare drum on the first beat reset back to that first position, but we have a bass drum on the second 16th note of beat 2 immediately after the snare drum. It sounds like this. So as we move from exercise B to H, that first bass drum on beat 1 of the bar stays where it is, but the second bass drum that follows the snare drum does the same process as before. It moves along 1/16th note each time, and then we have the 2-note and the 3-note variations. And the idea here is, again, we are internalizing vocabulary by exploring the possible bass drum placements following that downbeat. So this is B to H, and we will hear that unchanging first beat of the bar and the changing second beat of the bar as that bass drum follows the snare drum. I'll do each exercise twice. And we can start to hear how we can build up some really nice combinations. Now, if we take that a little bit faster, I'm going to work through B, C, D, E, F, G, and H once each, but I'm going to cycle through them quite quickly. And we will hear how this creates a really vibrant and quite dynamic bass drum line. And we can repeat that as many times as we like, or as we did in the previous example, we can choose 2 and combine them. So let's choose 2 at random. Let's do D and G. It would sound like this. And we would follow the same process as I demonstrated previously, maybe exploring some open hi-hats, exploring the bell pattern, playing it on the ride cymbal, and exploring some left foot hi-hat applications as well. Now, as we progress through the Fatback set, which is many pages long, we see something interesting happen. We start to combine movement in the first beat of the bar with movement in the second beat of the bar. So when we look at something like exercise J, we find that the first bass drum has been displaced by a 16th note, and we have a bass drum on the second 16th note of the second beat. So we're playing a bass drum on both E's of the bar. It sounds like this. And when we run that to the bottom of the page, that first bass drum stays in the second 16th note position, and we again run through the permutations following the bass drum. So J to P, I'll do each one twice. We will hear that unchanging bass drum on the second 16th note of the bar this time. And we can hear some really interesting syncopation starting to occur there. And all this, again, is feeding us ideas for our vocabulary, feeding us ideas of different patterns and grooves that are available to us. We can, of course, combine 2. Let's do N and O. They sound quite nice. There's a lot of 16th note syncopation on this one. So this is a 2-part exercise comprising N and O from page 29. And we can hear this really kind of interesting, almost offbeat, syncopated groove that nevertheless maintains a downbeat on beat 2 of the bar on that snare drum. Finally, because I don't want to labour the point, I think you can see where I'm going with this, we can combine the first half of the set, where that bass drum begins on the first beat of the bar, with the second half of the set, which begins with that bass drum on the second 16th note of the bar. So I'm going to combine F with O. Let's do those 2 and see what happens. And because the ideas are flowing, I can start to hear that groove. I can start to formulate a thematic idea, and I can start exploring some other vocabulary. So I'll leave that there for today. The remainder of the set covers every permutation of bass drums before the snare drum and after the snare drum on a 16th note grid. So it goes on for pages and pages. And I will tackle next time, in the next video, I will tackle the same idea but working with the snare drum. And crucially, we will explore possible ghost note applications. And once we start varying the accent and taking the accent off that second beat of the bar, we can encounter some really nice syncopated grooves. So keep an eye out for that one. I'll see you on the next one. If you're interested in what I do, please check out my website. I have various publications, I teach, I have online lessons, online masterclasses. I would love to work with some of you in that capacity as well. But I hope this has given you some ideas to think about. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.